we are in the ruins. In the book, I write that many systems, but regenerative agriculture being one of these systems, it takes industrial capitalism for granted and earth as a resource, as a guarantee. Okay. And so what a lot of our systems do is they just take this competitive capitalistic mindset, which works in some cases. I'm not saying it's all bad, but for granted, meaning that competition is the absolute working force behind all of Earth. Human systems, natural systems. What I mean by that is human created systems, hard systems, technological based, machine based systems, and complex systems, loving systems, reciprocal, reciprocity based systems, etc. And it just pins competition in that. The second part being that Earth as a resource is as a guarantee. So much of this has imbued my work over the last 15 years, and to some degree, when I answer, when I asked the question earlier, what do you have that you feel like you can't let go? To me, that's this.
So I think we share a common sense of what we need to call in and what we need to start letting go of, stepping into, and ultimately, the question of this podcast is it's really interesting that the timing of like when we had our first conversation, the timing now, what's coming to a head, and I really want to get your, feelings, thoughts about this book and this moment in time and how it's published and all the processes you've gone on, because this really is about Stagtine and the book that you were kind enough to send to me. And I say that it's come at a poignant time because this whole podcast was all about relearning. I got a lot of things wrong that I then knew about, and then it started to kind of approach all the areas of my life around what it does mean to be human. And that was always the question to what does it really mean to be human? And that's what I share with you and I get from you. It's really understanding what it really does to be in relation. But yeah, welcome back. And thank you for being here. And this conversation is going to be very impactful. I'll say initially, which I know I'll reinforce in the intro, but just if anyone's listening, to go back and listen to our first episode because it for me it's still up there, one of the best podcasts I've done, and it really does set the scene, and it's a phenomenal podcast. I really think we go through a lot of great areas, and yeah, I'd urge everyone to go back and listen to that. But I'll let you speak. Welcome back, brother.
Thanks, Chris. A blessing and a joy. With this book launch, as authors go through, it's both a pain and a blessing simultaneous. We have to talk to a lot of people, and if you're really excited about the work or the words in these books, it's an exciting thing to do. And I'm excited. I'm always excited. This book speaks to the heart of the last 15 years of my wife and I's life, and hopefully to the next 500 years of our legacy, at the least. But my time with you last time we got together and did a podcast, it was one of the funnest podcasts I've ever been on. I thought our communication and our conversations were thrilling and educational to me, but you're just this like joy to speak to, and I'm not here to compliment you. I really do mean it, regardless if it's a compliment or the opposite. But I've been looking forward to doing this podcast for about 2 or 3 months now. So the day is here. I'm excited. I'm blessed. I'm honored. Thanks for having me on.
Incredible. Thank you, man. Yeah, I appreciate that. Uh, and yeah, I've listened to the book. I got it done. It was challenging. If I'm going to be really honest, it was really challenging. But the more I stayed with it, and the more I lent in and just really sat with some of the questions and a lot of open-ended things, which really I get from you. A lot of it's open-ended, and it's not like a how-to, and that is so beautiful and rare, sadly rare, because I got this from another guy I had on a podcast. It was like, if you ask me how to do something, I'm gonna find out where you are and I'm gonna kick you in the shin. It's like it's not about how. If the why is big enough, the how will come. And I love that because everyone's trying to outsource their own intuition, outsource their own innate connection to this land, to this earth. Outsource that to who? It's like, who's the authority of your own connection? And it's like, when we do that, we learn something, we copy paste, and what is it? What is that? What's the process there? If it would be copying pasting for too long, and that's the invitation for me. So I got so much from it, and I will re-listen, I'll read it, and I'll be sharing it with a lot of people. The poetic nature of this book, you cannot do it whilst you're doing other things. I've learned that very quick. It really needs to be accompanying the moment and you, and a walk or something that's, because it's so poetic. And I've not
Yeah.
listened to or read any of the other books. So my first question, how does it feel for you in reference to, is this your fourth publication? As in a book?
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is the fourth and easiest book I've ever written.
Oh.
I'm trying to get more simple. I'm trying to take the feedback. The last book I published in 2023 was titled Dark Cloud Country, and I think most of the reviews were in 100 and 150 years from now, if we're still speaking the English language, maybe we'll know how to read it then. Which I think is both a critique um, of the structure of the book. Maybe I could have given it more simply. But it's also the demand that I think so many readers today were reading for pleasure. I think we're trying to read to substantiate our current worldviews. I think we're reading stories, especially to be elevated into this other plane where we can forget about the world that exists all around us, the humdrum, the mundane. And that's not my belief at all. I don't think so. When I read stories, it's not to be elevated elsewhere, it's to awaken, right? To be punched in the face and startled by the truth all around us. It's to wake up. Stories are to wake us up. They're not to enliven us, they're not to transport us, they're to wake us
Mm.
up. And so, if anybody is approaching anything that I've ever written, it's important to really come at it from this perspective, in the sense that community and unity are not the same words. I mean, obviously they have the same root. Unity to some degree is just, it's a cheering section at a high school football game. Right when you're losing, they're cheering on. Obviously, I have some experience there, I guess, and so I speak about my own experience. But when the team is losing, they're cheering. When the team is winning, they're cheering. And when they're angry, they're cheering. When they're mad, they're cheering. It's just cheering. That's unity. That's not a bad thing, right? It was wonderful playing in high school sports and college sports, having a cheering section or whatever, a fan section. That's wonderful and it's well placed there. But in story, in the soul of Earth, in the soul of humanity, which is Earth, we are Earthlings. We can talk about that in this episode because that's really a central tenet of this book. You cannot understand stag tying without understanding what I just said, and we can get to it. But that's not the point of this book. It's not to build unity. It's to understand the commons, embrace community through a co-creative community where it's built via communion. Just trying to keep coming up with words that sound like community. The point is, community is looking at the hard things, right? It's coming together and understanding that we are different wholes. And when we come together, a new whole is born. And sometimes that new whole is really painful, right? And the stories aren't painful, but it asks you to see yourself. We're alongside this book launch, we've opened up these things called the Stagtine Seminars, which is a 10-week online live cohort. It's like a book study plus 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 plus. Think like college class that's a seminar, or college seminar based around the ideas of the book. And so built around this whole book is about 650 pages of supplemental materials, papers, books, stories, journal entries, whatever they are, that we're going to be reading alongside of the book. So I guess if you really like to read, maybe this is a fine place for you. If you don't come to the Stagtine seminars, and we'll be talking about it in this greater, fuller, more holistic understanding. Basically, what is the book, and what is all the materials that I got to dive into and associate with, commune
Mm.
with, to write the book, and we're starting with story. And the reason you start with story, story and science, I think we so often see that they're interposed. They don't get along too well, right? You have storytellers and you have scientists, and a lot of scientists aren't storytellers, and most storytellers don't really care about the science, right? They see the beautiful green grass, whereas the scientists see it as photosynthesizing chlorophyll in, stamens and plant, they see the world differently. That's the main understanding of it. What I'm trying to do here and what we're trying to do in the cohort, which you'll see in the book, is that if we focus on story, we can basically reach out to science, turn it into a creative or imaginative science, bring it inside of the story and let everything co-create a much more beautiful world, to lean on some phraseology from Charles Eisenstein. There in the unity, only under the community of all can we really move forward. And so I'm rambling a little bit, um, but approach this book like you would approach a story and then accept the science when it comes, because it's there happily as a very creative science. But creative science, it asks questions and it doesn't really do anything else. Like you said, and we've gotten a lot of reviews from the book
Mm.
from early readers or advanced readers or beta readers. And in the streamline of the responses, it's been so interesting. Um, it's been so interesting because they all focus on this book showed us questions that we already had but didn't know we had, and then
Mm.
helped us make the decision for ourselves. And that to me is the greatest blessing and review I think I could ever have received. Because I'm not here to tell you how to live, and I'm not telling you, how to do or live or be or what practices to involve around your life in order to be or live or whatever a good life, right? That's up to you and how you understand it. I'm here to open our eyes, right? To tell these stories that awaken us. And so, yeah, you got to approach it from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. So what, say that again. So what was the, um, you just mentioned is this the story. It gave you more answers than you thought would happen, or the questions that you had, more answers came, essentially, the journey of the book. So could you talk a little bit more about that? Because I remember your brother talking to your grandmother and saying,
Yeah.
how will we know what to ask? And I fucking love that. Like, how genius to say that.
Yeah. 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 The book, it's interesting. The first section, the publishers, they didn't like this. Many publishers wanted me to like depersonalize the story, and so obviously we didn't publish with them. I don't believe story can be depersonalized. The very nature of story is to personalize it. It is to grab the person, right, and shake them, regardless if they're the teller or the hero of the story. So we can't remove the personality from a story. Then we just remove the essence of story from story, and now it's nothing at all but this naked, ugly thing. And
Information.
so we left it in there, but the section one begins with the story. Yeah, it's just information, which is so boring, so absolutely boring, and it's boring of the wrong variety. Humdrum dailiness can be boring, but there's beauty there. This sort of boring is just boring. There's no other synonyms to throw in. But section one, it starts with some family history of ours, and my siblings and we were all homeschooled for the majority of our lives. And my mom, she has a very rudimentary education from a Polish immigrant family, quite poor. Um, and she never really had access to any sort of higher education. I mean, high school was as far as she went, and it was a pretty not decadent high school, but you're not going from there to Harvard, if you will. And so when she started homeschooling us, she immediately understood her own shortcomings, that she was not going to be able to train us in the way that we should go, but rather she told us later in life that her worldview was, if she could educate us by just opening our eyes, that is to say, seeing ourselves, having that self-knowledge, and then also allowing us to see the world around us, that the whole world would be not our playground, but our opportunity. That we wouldn't be able to close ourselves immediately in, right? So many kids, they go to school, they learn, they're told what to learn, and they're put inside of this box, which is a course syllabus or something like this. And so she knew that she couldn't teach us math, but if you taught us one, how to learn math ourselves. So how do we learn? And then two, she taught us how to ask the
Mm.
right questions and then to listen, i.e., how do we then learn individually, right? Because my brother, he might learn in one way. I myself, I might learn in another way. And if we can find that secret truth, that is
Wow.
that self-knowledge, the
Mm.
world is our opportunity. And so, yeah, in the book, I mentioned my brother, he asks, but what question should we ask? And she says that's the wrong question. It's not the questions that we ask, but really it's our humility and our kinship, that is to say, our worldview, right? When those questions inhabit us. And then we have to let the earth speak. And when we let the earth speak, we realize that it just becomes earth because we are it and we become it. And there's a single unity, this kinship that develops that feels very new to people like myself. And it's quite ancient to many people still around the world. It's this kinship ethic, this kinship worldview that many indigenous and modern, wisdom holders, they still carry, they still hold with them. That I call us, the latecomers to the party who drank the last cup of party punch. And then we commandeered the karaoke. We kicked the singers off the stage and we screamed into the mic, everybody has to come drink this punch. That's to a large degree who we are. We're rediscovering that which we kicked off the stage originally. We're drinking the last cup and telling everybody to drink. It has deep problems. And so this idea of kinship, it's new to us. Um, but I think it's absolutely central, and it begins in questions. And by the way, it doesn't conclude in answers. When you read Stagtine, you're going to learn a lot about um, the science in adrenal processing and glutathione, receptors. You're going to learn about intergenerational genomics and adaptive landscape genomics and phenotypes and epigenetics and a lot of history and deep history around the movement and natural patterns of herbivores. And you're going to learn anthropology and archaeology. I wanted to be an archaeologist when I grew up, and so there's an entire chapter dedicated to some work that I performed with the team in the Dordogne River Valley in the southeast of France, really
Hmm.
the south central and the southeast of France in Lascaux and Grand Roque La Cabriels, ancient Paleolithic and earlier cave systems. And so we're learning archaeology and archaeobotany and so much more. Like that's in there, right? This knowledge, this creative science is nestled inside of the story. And so story, science are not interposed, but we allow them to be convivial. And when story and science become convivial, there is the co-creative convergence that I think our species is so dependent upon. And not to kind of put the cart before the horse, because we have so much more conversating to do here, but it's at that moment, I think, that people, modern people, industrialized, civilized, modern people, at one moment realize when they look back at themselves and they say, holy damn, I'm an earthling, we become Homo sapiens again. One archaeologist, he's actually an anthropologist, he wrote, we can return to the Pleistocene because as a species, we have never really left.
Hmm.
That's the hope, right? And to return to the Pleistocene in regard to the context of this book of Stagtine, it's not to become a hunter-gatherer again or to throw away civilization or to do anything drastic, but rather to see Homo sapiens as one mammal amidst the 600 or 6,500, relations of mammals all around us and to start walking with them. And I'll leave this ramble with this, and then maybe you can ask more direct questions for me to answer. Else you're just going to get a lot of rambling from me, which maybe is what you want. So please tread where
I
you
got a
want. But
question. I got a
at
question.
the writing of this book, please go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you finish, and I'll go in.
Okay. At the writing of this book, when I started to write the query letters, so if you're a listener here and you've never really partaken in a book publishing process, which is probably most, one, don't. I mean, oh my God, it's absolutely devastating. Book publishing is it's arduous. It's not for humanity as a Homo sapien, I don't think. Um, but I started to write the query letters, which is basically when you're reaching out to publishers or agents and you're saying, hey, this is the idea for the book. And I kept focusing on the idea that the book is trying to reawaken our understanding of what it means to be human. That was the phrase I was using at the time. We need to reawaken what it means to be human.
Mm.
And everybody was asking me, including some of our team here, like, what does that mean? Like,
Yeah.
what does that even mean? Like, be human. Thanks, Daniel. Like, say something more than that. And well, anyways, part of part of my early understanding, which is, by the way, not entirely distinct from the conclusion of my understanding at the conclusion of writing Stagtine, that is, it really stayed the same. But it's giving up this idea of outcomes, which we can talk about. But as we give up the idea of outcomes, you can find yourself to be quite depressed. right? Because to some degree, as a human, as a person nowadays, doing things, acting in certain ways, being in certain, modalities or whatever, you might be trying to find human health. You might be trying to find earth health or solve climate change or reduce your waste upon this planet, etc. You have a particular outcome in mind. And when you read this book and you start to realize that as one mammal, we are distinct from the rest of the mammals and distinct from rest of our relations, two and four-legged, vegetative, slimy, slithering, and every other cousin on this planet of ours. We're distinct from the sense that we actually have a view of outcomes. Okay? When a cow eats grass, it eats it to be part of its day, right? When a plant vegetates and undergoes photosynthesis, it's not thinking about climate change, not as far as we can tell.
Hmm.
And if we ever can tell, I hope it just substantiates the fact that it's just being, it's living today, right? So humans, we're pretty distinct in the fact that we have these outcomes in mind and we live our lives according to it.
Yeah.
We're not really good at being in place. We don't have roots. And when you remove that idea of outcome, I found myself to be quite depressed. If being human is the removal or eradication of outcomes, depression is really the only thought that ensued from this. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's infinitely wiser than me. His name is Wahankupe Topa, Lakota, sun dancer, an elder, and he said, Daniel, you're seeing the world, you're seeing Earth through the wrong eyes. Your worldview is the problem. It's not the state of depression, it's the worldview that allows the depression to inhabit your soul. And he says, hope is not the expectation of an outcome, but the eradication of outcomes altogether
Hmm.
in the belief that being human will be enough. And I asked, enough for what? Right? Like being human is enough. Enough for what was my return, my question. And I'll never forget, he said, wrong question. Just like my mom said to my brother
360.
30 years ago, right? Wrong question.
Yeah.
Exactly, 360. And so that's more or less the foundation of the philosophical side of the book.
Love it. Childhood flashbacks. Yeah, bro. So
Yeah.
wow. I do want to talk about your relationship to Lakota and learning a lot from earth-based spirituality, if you can term them that, and what the collective shadow is around that. Because I know there's one, and I think that penetrates into something which can easily be glamorized. And I'd love your thoughts on that.
Hmm.
What is the shadow around like this could be pursued as passive kind of reluctancy to be a part of a change. And I don't know what it is, and I'm not going to project ideas of what it could be. But I wondered your time spent with people that do live on the land. Like, is there any like, all we're all doing our work. Um we're all doing what we need to do
Right.
to be better. So is there some like essence of what you pick up when you speak to um people that are not in the world, let's say that this book is really speaking about.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the way I want to answer the question is early on in the writing, um, so the book is about agriculture, right?
Mhm.
And so we have to view these ideas um, with that centrally in mind. This is not a social critique or cultural critique sort of book. Um, in many ways, Stagtine is a chronicle, right? An epic tale, including its imaginative sciences, chronicling the transition from our farm from a regenerative isolationist type farm over into what we call concentric rewilding. And maybe we can talk about that in the future here. Um, and so with agriculture in mind, um, what we wanted to do with this book is shift the conversation from humans telling nature what to do,
Sure.
because that's the industrial, mythos. Um, it's the climate change mythos. It's the mythology of today. It's that humans can save the world by telling cows how to be better cows. It's that humans can save the world by building more hydroelectric, dams and power and everything else. It's humans coming in to save the world. And the book doesn't talk much about this. This is really Stagtine is book one of a trilogy, and I've been developing this thought more so in the second book, which is called Cliff Walk. It comes out next year. Um, but so much of this industrial mythology, this industrial mythos that puts humans front and center as saviors of the earth, it comes down to what I think I would like to call like this carbonic messiah theology, that as long as we care about carbon, and you can place biodiversity in there, you can place, human health epidemics, you can place whatever you like. I'm gonna focus on carbon here because it's easy. That as long as we focus on carbon, that this theology of earth saviors is allowed to rise, and we become the Messiah. And as the Messiah, we have all of this power, but also the necessity to wield this power to what? Save the world through carbon sequestration, carbon mitigation, carbon reducial, etc. And so the not just the power, but the overwhelming desire to utilize that power is created because we see ourselves, we position ourselves
Yeah.
in the story. Realize we're talking about stories again as Earth's savior.
Yeah.
And so in this book, and this is most of agriculture. I don't care if you're listening to this and you're going down the regenerative agriculture, the sustainable agriculture, the plant-based meat version of agriculture. I don't care. You're a vegan. Like any way you approach agriculture, it's us telling the earth what to do. Now, you could you could pivot a little bit and say that, yeah, but we're trying to mimic Earth's natural patterns, right? And that's a lot of what the book is about. Really questioning, yes, but are we actually mimicking these patterns at all? That is to say, how do we perceive the world, and are we perceiving it correctly? There's entire sections, hundreds of pages in the book dedicated to those questions. Hopefully, those are the right questions. But as we look at this worldview and we see ourselves telling nature what to do, what we're trying to do in Stagtine and really the entirety of this trilogy, the Wildland Chronicles, is to take humanity's own creativity off the stage for just a moment. I mean, we've been creative for 10 to 12 to about 17,000 years of post-glaciation after the last glacial maximum. You have the Wisconsin and the interglacial
Mhm.
ice sheets, receding, and you see mankind coming to the fore as a dominant species, right? We can call this industrial life, just the last 10 to 12 to 17,000 years, depending on where you are and who you're talking to. This is industrial life. This is humans telling the landscape what to do. What we want to do in Stagtine is do the opposite. We want to position humanity as a mammal, one member of this wonderful cousin symphony all around us of mammals and everything else alike, vegetative and slithering and reptiles and amphibians and everyone else, bacteria and microorganisms, just one cousin in this great cacophony of voices and souls. And we want to ask for the first time, I think in a long time, especially for my type, right? I mean, Western European type, what would you have us do? Okay, so instead of looking at a cow and telling it what to do, what if you walked up to a cow and you asked, what would you have me do? Right? And then not that you can actually understand the answer, but the point is this: sit back and listen. Sit back and listen. Right? That's what the book is trying to do. And so when you're looking at it from an indigenous, when you're looking at it from an ancient earth wisdom, traditional ecological wisdom or knowledge perspective, um, it's not diving down a singular viewpoint of it. A singular indigenous people are looking at their oral mythology and capturing it as our new mythology, right? That's not going to solve anybody's problems. It's only going to hurt our relationship inside of this great community, both as mammals between mammals, that is to say, Homo sapiens between Homo sapiens as mammals and everything else around us. Rather, it's to have humanity step back for the first time and ask nature, what would you have me do? Because so much of this industrial ethos is it's not the cow, it's the how, meaning that cows aren't bad, but it's how humans are managing cows that are bad. But if humans could figure out how to manage cows better, it would now be good. That's what this phrase, it's not the cow, it's the how, that pervades. I mean, it was used in the COP conferences over the last couple of years, the climate conferences, international climate conferences. It's used in regenerative agricultural documentaries and books. It's everywhere. But what Stacktine is asking us to do is say, no, it's not the cow. It's not the how. It's rather humanity's lack of humility in either case, right? That is destroying humanity and it's destroying the natural world around us, Earth and its earthlings. And so, the book is dedicated to the animals that have taught us what the book is written about. Patty, Mara, Nancy, and Nellie. Every section is built upon a relationship, a conversation that I've had with my cousins, very much non-Homo sapien cousins, where they have instructed us, um, or they've really opened our eyes and had us question, is what we're doing in natural biomimicry and regenerative agriculture actually natural, actually mimicking the biology around us? Um, and are we actually regenerating? Because I think in the last conversation you and I had,
Mhm.
whenever that was, a year ago or maybe 6 months, 9 months ago, um, I think we talked a little bit about this, but I'll remind the listener, or maybe this is new data, I cannot fully remember the particulars. But our organization called the Robinia Institute, which is really a social emergence of concentric rewilding all over the country, teach courses and fellowships and all these other things. We also provide what's called ecological monitoring, where we will come into a farm, a landscape, build a community, a conversational pathway with that landscape, talking to the plants, talking to the soils, and then we'll build not a perfectly binary scoring system, but a way for humans early on that can't yet have that conversation with the landscape, an understanding of the landscape's ecological functioning. Okay, so it's not a scorecard or scoring system, but it's a way for us early in our reawakening as mammals to understand, have a little bit of a communicational pathway between us, the lands managers, the farmers, if you will, in our landscapes. And about 80 to 87% of the farmers that call us to come out, and it's about a day or two worth of monitoring every year, where we're just being on the land, walking with the land, talking with the land. About 80 to 87%, I don't know the exact number, of the farms that have us do that year over year are seeing decreasing biodiversity, decreasing soil organic matter. They are emitting more carbon than they're sequestering, on and on and on and on. The water cycles aren't purifying. The water cycles aren't healing. Nutrients aren't cycling, right? We have standing organic material that's not turning into humus, into stable soil organic matter, as all regenerative farms obviously want. It's what, to some large degree, the entire movement has been built upon: nutrient-rich soils producing nutrient-dense food for humanity. So it's producing food for humanity while healing the climate. Well, the interesting thing is farmers, be them regenerative or not, do a really fine job at producing food for humanity to some degree. Maybe another conversation for another day, but for now, let's say they do a fine job. What's interesting is that when they're actually in conversation with the land, we see the opposite happening for the earth. We don't
Mhm.
see increased biodiversity. We don't see increases in soil organic matter or carbon, etc. And so when we wrote this book, instead of trying to come out with another agricultural book to get farmers to better understand the practices on how to cover the soil and build the soil and make it more nutrient rich and balance its macro and micro, nutrient and mineral profiles, because those don't seem to be the problem. You can go to a conference, you can buy a course online, you can buy Gabe Brown's Dirt to Soil, a personal friend of mine, love you to death, but they're all practice based. These are the 6 principles of soil health. You follow these, you will regenerate. The problem is we're following them and we're not regenerating.
Yeah.
Some are, some are, and in some degree, it's regeneration on accident. It's not even, purposeful, because the nature that we're trying to mimic is not the nature of us. It's the nature around us. And as long as we're separate from that natural system, we are humanity or people in the industrial sense, and nature is nature around us. And yeah, we might say that she's our mother, but she's not actually our mother. She's like our friend's mother. A mom that we can get away from, a mom that we don't have to be with all the time. We don't have to love her, right? But if Earth is our actual mother, if we actually have to have relationship with her, as her and as us, meaning that we are earthlings. We are, bacteria and fungi that just took our clay with us. That's a sentence in Stagtown. I love that idea. Like that's who you and I are. We're just fungi and bacteria that took our clay with us. We just walked with it, right?
Yeah.
And so when we're
It's a,
looking at clay and fungi or
it's a,
in bacteria, we're
yeah.
looking at cousins, and they're in relationship. And everybody makes fun of me. I'm known around the world. Like somebody in Australia was posting on Instagram the other day and tagged me, not making fun of me, but just saying like relationship. Like Daniel, is just this guy on relation. But it's true. As long as we are separate from Earth, we can't regenerate.
Yeah.
It's impossible,
How
right? And
many
so
how
this
many
book is about
people
restoring that connection.
how many people do you know that get it and are in integrity with it? Can you
That's a
count
good
them on one
question.
hand? How many like, because it's, I know the how extreme it felt for me at the time when I started learning about your way of relating to this kind of stuff, and it felt quite foreign. I was like, surely it's one of those things where you think I should know about this if it's that evident. Um, and that's a question, yeah, to really lean into is like how many people do you know get it and are like, yeah, okay, let's do it. I mean, I listened to your conversation with Dugald Hind, and
Mm.
I'm gonna get him on the podcast when he's in
Oh,
London.
good.
So that'll be amazing conversation. But he he seemed to get it, and he said, well, amazing statement around climate change. Is like, okay, maybe if we got it wrong, just imagine we got it wrong, and it's not about the carbon. Then what? And it's like, yeah, because we're still in it. We're still relating to things in this way.
Yeah.
But I guess to go alongside, how many people do you know that are really like understanding this conversation? Go alongside that, um, I was going to say something. Maybe it'll come back. But yeah, if you want to run with that,
Yeah.
and then I'm sure it'll come back.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's it's a good question. It makes me pause. Um, because in the book I talk a lot about human domestication. We often as humans look at animals and we say domestic animal, wild animal. And I think a lot of animals look back at us and they look at some domesticated humans and some wild humans. And they're classifying us back and forth, not because they want to classify us, maybe because we taught them how to classify us. Um, which is a whole other conversation like AI, right? Computers have long been us talking to computers, and now we train them, and now they talk back to us. And now they're realizing that they don't need us as much, and soon maybe not at all. It's the same way with animals, right? If they have a very human tendency, it's because they're humanoids. We've created them. I digress though. And humans are domestic animals. Now, that's the point I'm trying to make. And in
Yeah,
in the book, I say something like,
the zoo
modern
human.
humans are poodles to wolves, or modern humans are to Neanderthals what poodles are to wolves. Because every human alive, besides a few different genetic traces, lineage groups, I mean, have between 2.5, 5% Neanderthal DNA in us.
That's important as well,
Um,
right? It's important that we
geez,
mated with them, which was like,
yeah.
oh, we weren't so brutish, and we actually.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. And so yeah, I have a pen here because my mind just goes and goes and goes. So like when I wrote this book, to be very clear, I wrote 1,300 page book. I just exploded on the screen. And then we obviously didn't publish all 1,300 pages and we turned it into a trilogy. And it's just I apologize, my mind just runs. And so I have a pen and paper here. I'll talk about the brutish history here in a minute. Let me just write that down. Brutish
And
history, come back.
yeah, and also there was a point in the book where he talked about that our brain size was very different, and we know that, but we assume that that's primitive. But it allowed me to tap into, okay, what was possible with a smaller brain size, and it felt like that
Right.
was what you were speaking to, and
Yeah. So
like,
so as domesticated humans, right? Yeah, you accidentally stumbled on the very heart of the book, which is why I keep pausing because I need to keep taking a step back. This is a beautiful question. Um, and it forces me to get to the heart of the book. And so, okay, so Stagtine subtitle is Concentric Rewilding, Science and a Tale of Letting Go. But let's focus on that idea of concentric rewilding. So much of what we have been involved with over the last 15 years in this wilding project, we call it the Timshel Wildland project. It's a 400-acre, quote unquote, concentric rewilding landscape. We raise beef, cattle, horses, goats, sheep. Occasionally have dabbled in some pigs and just wild gardens and, between Imbolc, all the way through Samhain. We do a lot of wild foraging and all sorts of things with our family. We try to consume about one wild foraged meal a day with us and the team and everybody else. So there's a lot going on. And so for the last 15 years, we've been concentrated on this transition from regenerative agriculture, which is very isolationist. It's very separatist. It's telling nature what to be because we humans have this prime understanding of how nature used to be, right? And so there's entire sections of the book that really question that. And I'm going to get
mm,
to that in a second. But kin-centric rewilding, it's a play on words. Rewilding is obviously not a new term, especially where you are in the UK, more so here in the United States, but it's not necessarily a new term. Kincentric is not a word at all. Every time I wrote it, the Microsoft Word was telling me it's not a word. Got annoying, but it's a mix between two words. It's kinship, okay, and concentric. And until we learn that we have a concentric relationship to the kinship innate within us, we are the bacteria and the fungi that just took our clay with us, is what I mean by that. And we work within the relationship within all relations, right? So many indigenous peoples, they have this understanding. Even in the beginning of the book, I make a comment that
Mm.
like if you're indigenous and you still hold earth and wisdom, you may want to like give this book to somebody else. Like I don't think I'm going to be telling you anything new. Like this book is for us latecomers, people who really need to relearn what it means to be human. But it's that kinship ethic. So many rewilding projects, and we worked. I mean, for the last 10 years, we've worked very professionally around the world in many rewilding projects trying to help. But they all start as moving companies. They all take the landscape. I always joke, they bring in a U-Haul, they pack all of the invasive species on the U-Haul and ship it off somewhere else. Like, as long as it's not here, it's fine. I'm just going to give that to somebody else. And then they go out and they buy, let's say they needed to heal a wetland. They'll go buy a beaver, bring the beaver in, realize they need to buy the river, so they buy the river, they buy the beavers, they buy the rivers, they put them together, and they say, now go be wild, right? And they write in the Guardian this wonderful paper about how amazing their rewilding project is, and then that's really that's really rewilding. And I'm not trying not to pick on them, but some of my words are a little bit aggressive. I realize they're doing their best. It's a particular worldview that I think needs to emerge with its landscape around it, but that's neither here nor there. In concentric rewilding, getting back to this idea that humans are to Neanderthals what poodles are to wolves, in order to concentrically rewild, we have to let go together to allow our domesticated livestock to rewild us and for us to rewild our domesticated livestock. We have to relearn what a Homo sapien is just as much as a cow has to relearn what a bovine is. They have been domesticated, and I gave this example the other day.
Mm.
It's like you're a 15-year-old individual who goes off to a summer camp or a high school camp or something like that for the first time. But all growing up, every single day, 3 times a day, all your family asked you to do was tell us where to drive you. Chick-fil-A, McDonald's, Burger King, or Taco Bell. Those are your 4 options. You tell us. So the individual had options, but really not, right? And every single time that individual ate, they felt sicker and sicker and sicker. Releasing our control over domesticated animals, it's in the same way as humans. When animals start to release their control back over us, we start to rewild together. It's like we're 15 years old. We don't know how to make a decision. We've only made a decision off of 4 different, food groups our whole lives, and we don't know what to do, right? We need to be concentrically rewilded. We need to let go slowly. We need to progressively have more options, try out more options, understand ourselves, grow in our self-knowledge, right? And so as we work through this, um, we stumble over many things. The first of which is this natural understanding of humans and animals in nature, and talking about the brutish history that we have to come back to. I did write it down. I wanted to come back to it. This is one fine example, right? The history of humanity from many people's perspective, especially a lot of agriculturalist perspective, is
Mhm.
that humans, emerged out of Africa 60,000 years ago as Homo sapiens, developed human beings as you and I would recognize us. We conquered the Neanderthals, we conquered the Denisovians, we conquered, Homo heidelbergensis, erectus, all these other, species of human, and we settled the globe. And when we settled it very finally, we started, and this is the overkill hypothesis, something I read about in the next book. But as we started to settle the globe, we started colonizing and conquering not only the human life around us, Neanderthals, Heidelbergensis, Erectus, etc., but also the mammals all around us. And we started to overkill these large mammals and, bring them to extinction. And so the idea there is that humanity is truly a colonizer, a conqueror, a dominator, right? And you see this a little bit in some ancient mythology. But there's really 2 questions that you have to unpack there. Number one, then why did we breed with them? And when you say breed with them, it's not a very simple conversation because it's not like breeding, right? Reproduction between two individuals necessarily shows a positive relationship, right? Skipping over some of the terms here that I don't really want to
Mhm.
use or draw attention to, but you get my
Mhm.
point. But the point is archaeologically, even botanily is, if that's a word, using archaeobotany as a measuring and understanding tool. That's what I mean by that.
Mhm.
You can see that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, they've lived together in caves and many different habitation types for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Wow.
And so they truly didn't just breed with each other, but we cohabitated for longer than, there's been a Europe, in the modern sense. I mean, for very long periods of time. So number one, we have to start to see this transition from competition over to some sort of collaborative environment, right? But as we start to understand our own selves, and I told you this would happen, when you read Stag Time, the idea is you have to look at yourself first, right? So I talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but these
Hmm.
Stag Time seminars, the first seminar that we do live with each other in this cohort is identify yourself, right? Turn inwards. You have to have a self-understanding of yourself before I can have an understanding of you, or that you can have an understanding of yourself with me. Self-understanding has to come first. And so in the book, that's the first thing we have to realize, that this idea of competition and collaboration, this idea of what makes a human, it isn't technology, right? I think we've so become used to using technology so well that we believe that Homo sapiens are a tool or technology using species. What if we weren't? I don't know the answer to that, but the question that would lead us into a greater state of humility with our relations is, what if we weren't? And then you walk down that path, you start to realize that none of life around us operates in this linear, this binary, this complicated system of I'm a human, therefore I use technology. It doesn't happen in the natural world around us. And so if we are the natural world, we have to start questioning, why is this around us? It's because the world around us is not the natural world, right? It's Mother Culture, it's not Mother Earth, right? It's this industrial system, it's not the system inherent in fractals all around us in the operations of Earth and its Earthlings.
Uh-huh.
And then we have to start to look at agriculture. And this is really where the book is trying to get to. So much of agriculture, be it conventional or regenerative, as I've already said, is telling nature what to do. But if our own understanding of what makes a human has been off for this long, and there's tons of examples. So for instance, we think agriculture arose, to really stabilize civilization after the last glacial maximum, the Ice Age. But in the book, we talk about the Ohal'o II culture in the Jordanian River Valley that was already progressively pretty deep into agriculture by 23,000 years ago. And so there's a huge question mark there. If agriculture started 10,000 years ago after the last ice age, why do we have agriculture 23,000 years ago during the last ice age? There's some bigger problems there. Again, the question isn't when did agriculture begin? The question is, if agriculture didn't begin 10,000 years ago, what does that mean?
Hmm.
Well, it means that there's complexity. Then we look at archaeology from Katol Hoyak in this hall of this, I think it's called the Hall of Shrines, where about 9,600 years ago, the Natufian cultures permutated into a pretty stabilized people, but they didn't leave hunter-gatherers and then their hunter-gathering worldviews at the city gates. They erected the city of Katol Hoyak about 9,600 years ago, that is, and they have these gorgeous paintings that James Mellart in the 1960s uncovered. Section 4 of the book talks a lot about this, if this is interesting to anyone. Um, but it has both hunters and husbandmen. You have the hunter-gatherers and the agriculturalists actually co-creating the world around them. And so there's nuance there. It's not it's not complicated competition and very linear understanding, which was given to us in the Enlightenment by, John Locke and Thomas Hobbes and everybody else, that we're at the state of nature. We progress through this enlightening moment where we leave the state of nature and hunter-gathering beside. We come into the state of civil society where we have agriculture and civilization and language and everything else. And everything outside of that is outside of that, right? The Greek word for people outside of the Greek world is barbarians, right? You have Romans looking at the ancient Celts, my ancestors, and they're just describing these people who are outside of Roman influence. And that's their identity. Their identity is out of this story. Thank God, by the way, that there were people out of this story and they weren't colonized by these industrial thoughts. Not that necessarily the totality of Roman culture is negative, but rather that their nuance that humanity has lived with for hundreds of thousands of years, right, is the nuance and balance within that nuance that has kept us alive. Today, we are destroying ourselves by eradicating the nuance. It's linear, it's complicated, it's instruction manuals, it's technology, it's practices. And so, again, the question, what if we were to release everything we know about the definitions of humanity? What if civilization and agriculture have nothing to do with each other? What if they were co-creative wholes that came together for the moment for a particular reason that wasn't stability, but rather just that's what they wanted to do, right? I mean, it's just so interesting, especially when you have like the quote unquote invasion, as the archaeologists write, of the Western Hemisphere, the indigenous invasion. Again, I use air quotes if you're not watching this, where they look at the Alaskan land bridges from Siberia to Alaska and the Bering Strait. The Bering Strait land bridge is what it's called, the theory. And they say about 13,000 years ago, the Clovis people came over, and there's this whole Clovis hypothesis about a very linear, quote unquote, invasion into the Western Hemisphere. And it's interesting. We can talk about this all day, but camelids, originated. Just listen to it. It's unbelievable to me. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Elf. It's a Christmas movie with
Yeah.
Will Ferrell. Do people in the UK watch this movie?
Yeah. It's very famous.
Okay. Um, Yeah, okay. This is the joke. So 3.7 million years ago, camelids, to some large degree, start to arise in the fossil record. Obviously, the fossil record means nothing in terms of their actual arrival, but this is the moment that we can witness. 3.7 million years ago, camelids, camels, llamas, even ancient horses, originate in Nova Scotia. So this is far, far, far northeast Western Hemisphere. By about 300,000 years ago, they're all over the globe, and they're even better suited and adaptive. Their phenotypes are more adaptive to the Eurasian landscape, obviously the African landscape, the North African landscape today, and everywhere in between. But they began in the northeast of the Western Hemisphere, and so they had been walking back and forth from the Western Hemisphere to the quote unquote old world, the Eastern Hemisphere, Asia, Eurasia, Africa, etc. Europe, and humans have been living alongside of this whole time as Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, Denisovians, Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, what is it, Antiquitous, Africana. Anyways, you can just keep going. There's so many. I think there's 20, 27 of them. We have us, all different versions of ancient us, and we're just watching them go walk back and forth, right? And
Uh-huh.
in Elf, the movie with Will Ferrell, there's this moment where all of the elves in in the North Pole, the elf gets what's his name, Buddy, gets on a raft and he's gonna float to go find his dad or whatever, and the narwhal pops out of the ocean and he's like, "Bye, buddy. Hope you find your dad." Like for millions of years, humans were just standing in the Asian Northeast steppes, watching camels walk back and forth, and we're just like, I wonder where they're going. Like, I hope you find your dad. Like, we this curiosity was locked because it wasn't civilized, and as long as this curiosity wasn't civilized, it was locked in place. Which means that indigenous peoples are only, been here for 13,000 years, which the archaeology and the indigenous voices that are finally getting a moment
Hmm.
in the sun, about 500 years too late, um, they're telling a different story. And as long
Hmm.
as there's a different story for humanity, because you look inwards and then you look outwards, what if there's a different story for animals as well? Like, so for instance, I'll use this, and if it's interesting, we can continue, else you can drive me down a different thought pattern. Um, wow, there's a 6.5 foot black snake crawling in the canopy right above my window here. Oh my God, it's like literally 2 inches thick. This is the coolest thing. I just have to pause. That is so cool. It's going from like one canopy to another canopy like a squirrel, but it just like arched its bot. That was
Yeah.
that was that was so cool. Hi, buddy.
I
Okay, but
hope,
like for instance,
I hope, I hope it finds what it's looking for.
probably a bird's nest. We are celebrating the snake. The bird is mourning. It's that nuance. It's the complexity that we're talking about.
Yes. No, I think you're on
You
to,
know?
there's a big thread here, and I want you to continue. Because,
Yeah. The as we start to as we look back and we identify the misunderstandings that humanity might not have actually conquered and colonized the whole world as a good thing. I think this is a very fine understanding to have nowadays. It's important to look at the domestic animals that we've domesticated, the little humanoids that we've created in our own little
Mhm.
agricultural systems, and start to realize that how we perceive, let's say natural herbivory might not be the way that herbivores in nature pre to that colonization, that domestication of that species may have acted. So, for instance, in regenerative agriculture, you get these ideas that herbivores mob, mow, and move. And they do these things, one, innately, like there's some dumb machine that just operates in this way. And also, two, you have this thing called the predator-prey connection. And that's that predators, especially apex predators, because they're always trying to basically compete with this idea of life source, that they're always trying to kill the prey species. They just can't get enough, is really the worldview that it comes from. They're always pushing herbivores into tight herds where they're safe there. And as they get pushed into tight herds, the grass, the forage is denuded, it's consumed very quickly. And so in order for them not to die of hunger, that is the prey species, the herbivores, they have to move forward. So not only do we have this idea when we're talking about herbivores mobbing, mowing, and moving, that they're more or less very unthinking, very dumb technology pieces that are just, this is what they do. There's no nuance there, but you have the idea of competition. Okay, and so in the book we talk about interspecial and intraspecial competition. Interspecial is the predator-prey connection between species, interspecial competition. That predators push prey animals naturally in nature. This is very, I mean, this, if you go to an agricultural conference and has anything to say about regenerative agriculture, this is lecture one. Lecture two would be it's not just interspecial competition, but intra-species competition. Intra-species competition is as they're in this tight mob, there's the competitive mentality between animals, cows, between calves and their moms, between moms and their sisters, other cows, etc., between the entire herd, that because we're packed so densely, there's a limited idea of resources, more or less a zero-sum game. If I don't eat it, you will, and if you will, I will never get it and I'll starve to death. So you have intraspecies competition forcing them to uniformly graze the landscape. We call this in regenerative agriculture grazing, adaptive grazing, management intensive grazing, holistic plan grazing. We call these things by their names because I think if we were to actually see them for what they are, we would be doing something else entirely. Does competition, and so this is the question, and the book doesn't answer it. All I'm going to do is ask. But the question is this: does intraspecial and intraspecial competition rule the ecological functioning of the world around us? That is the one question. So we need to look at this historically. We need to look in oral and indigenous mythologies. We need to look at the archaeology and archaeobotany and anthropology, not necessarily of humans, but of these herds and how they developed. So, for instance, you have bison antiquus and bison latifrons. These are ancient bison species here in the Western Hemisphere, North American continent, Turtle Island, and they were here previous to the melting of the last ice age, the last glacial maximum. They were really thriving, but as the ice age really receded, that is to say, as the ice walls, the Wisconsin ice sheets receded northwards, the vegetation changed around them. It changed from C3 grasses to C4 grasses, or basically from cool season grasses that grow during the cool season. Obviously, we're in an ice age, so generally speaking, any vegetation that grows is want to grow in a cooler environment. And it transitioned from that over to what's called warm season grasses. Now, these are totally different species of grasses. They don't grow until it's at least 70 degrees outside. And so this is an entirely new set of grasses awakening from Earth. This is Earth deciding to clothe herself with an emergent abundance that only she can. The ice recedes, and Earth's like, oh, here's a new species of grass. It's called a warm season grass. How unbelievably nuanced and marvelous is that? And what you see is that bison antiquus and bison latifrons recede from the surface of Earth. They turn into bison, which is infinitely smaller than both latifrons and antiquus, because warm season grasses don't pack the energy that cool season grasses do. And so we see the evolution of the bison species. This is about 130, 140,000 years ago. We see this really dominating the scene. And but what do? Right? We use cattle in planted and cultivated cool season pastures, because cool seasons are going to fatten cows very quickly,
Mhm.
right? And then put cattle on it, right? When their natural grazing instincts, right, is not antiquus and latifrons. It's not the height of the last glacial maximum. The Wisconsin ice sheet is hundreds of thousands of, or not hundreds of thousands of miles, but thousands of miles north of where we are currently. It's not a tundra. We don't live in a steppe. We live in a grassland, right? This is not a cool season dominated place anymore. This is warm season. We have to let this nuance invade our agricultural practices. Do they mob? Do they mow? Do they move? What is the role of competition? All really big questions, and I'm happy to talk about any of them in particular if you like. But it's that new worldview. It's the concentric worldview where we all get rewilded together through the asking of questions that really is drawing to the point of the book, and it's really the point of this conversation, but it's attention. Okay. You could
Yeah.
delete everything that I've said over the last hour, and the only word you remember is attention. Attention, I've heard it say recently, attention is a moral act. Be here, be present, observe. Don't just do what you think nature wants, stop and ask her. Pay attention for the first time. And maybe, just maybe, attending to our relations. Okay, being an attending participant in the community of our relations. Maybe that is enough. I think that's what Wahankape Topa, um, I think that's what he was really getting at, is
Mhm.
be present, attend to Earth. Don't try to dominate it. Don't try to steward it. Don't try to push her in a particular direction as if you know. Because by the way, you don't even know yourself. You don't even know yourself. And until you start to know yourself, how are you going to tell a cow how to know itself? You're not a cow. You don't speak the language of a cow. By the way, you don't eat and shit grass all day, right? We could never live that way.
Hmm.
We've not evolved those characteristics. And so not
Yeah.
only do we not understand cows, but we don't even, well, I'm repeating myself, but we don't even understand ourselves. And so
Yeah.
learn there, start there, and allow the creative sciences and the stories to carry us into an entirely new, but simultaneously old, ancient way of being.
Okay. So to interject slightly around
Please.
what works, we will jump on board with pretty simply. I feel what humans are good at is if something works, and I guess that is also dependent on how you're measuring something and what your markers are for working. Um, but if something, there's a lot of people who care about this conversation, as you know. When something starts to work, like I would imagine your farm is, or a few examples, many examples of true stewardship and like in relationship with land, with plants, with animals, with all the above and below. When something starts to work, then you have more attention because you can demonstrate, say, a yield and how much nutrition there is, or the. I'm kind of figuring out the answer to this question as I go, as it becomes into my awareness. It's kind of like a verbal processing because
Please.
I know the hurdles that stand in the way of that for people. Because it really does depend on what you're trying to, what the judgment is of the outcome, and what you're trying to also achieve. But I think what's going to really help this conversation is it's a big leap for people to join you in this conversation. It's a big leap to say, listen to the animals. It's even a bigger leap to say, listen to the plants. I feel people can kind of get with the animals, but with the plants and the earth, and then, okay, they're gone. So it's a big leap. And I also want to talk about grief because I think that's part and parcel with this conversation, which we'll get onto. But like, as it is a big leap for people because everyone's busy, there's time, there's money, there's debt, there's all sorts going on for people. And it's a big leap to then deprioritize so much that you're already entrenched in. And that might be house, kids, mortgage responsibilities, or whatever it might be. So then I'm just trying to gain the reins on the conversation and the people I want to speak to about this kind of stuff. Who, as I said with the last conversation, it's like their ears are up. It's like, okay, there's something to this. I feel it. But
Yeah.
then what do you think holds the book back in reaching people and in letting people just step forward into this perspective? What's going to hold the book back? Because I think that question can get us closer to understanding like the the leap getting smaller, or the step getting a little bit smaller for people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fundamental. Um, I think the first thing we have to ask is what does it mean to leap? Because when I see the word leap, I wrote it down here in this paper in front of me. I see myself leaping off of a large cliff, right? And I think that's the way a lot of people see it. Because I think a lot of people listen to me, they read my books, and they think to themselves, I'm not yet in the position to do something that drastic. So obviously, our definition of leap means drastic.
Mm.
Yeah, I think I think it doesn't have to. I think that's a very human imposed definition of what it means to change. I don't think anything in our true selves as earthlings and in earth around us undergoes large change. I think to a large degree, it's only humanity that is able to do this. So, for instance, take a clear cutting of a forest. The worst natural disaster in history cannot clear cut a forest. But a simple Tuesday afternoon in the right vehicles and the right machines Humans can clear the forest perfectly. Absolutely. No fire has ever killed every tree species for good. No flooding, no dams breaking, no earth and flooding event, right? Nothing has ever been able to truly, truly clear cut a forest in perpetuity. Glaciation, think about it this way. Glaciation, I mean, miles tall of ice still couldn't keep the forest at bay. During the last ice age where I'm sitting in central Virginia, this was a really a spruce and fir based tundra. We're talking negative 30 degrees Celsius to a large degree for most of it. And we've had 19 different interglacial events, that is to say, ice age recede, ice age recede. We've had about 19 different interglacial events in the known history. And so it wasn't always a tundra. But my point is, when it was cold, it was a tundra. When it was warmer, it was a, you know, dry mixed oak, hickory based, forested landscape. And so I think what we have to realize is that nature moves very slowly. Ralph Waldo Emerson has this marvelous quote. He says, "We must accept the pace of nature, and her secret is patience." Her
Mm.
secret is patience. When you listen to me, I think a lot of people, and maybe this is you, and I speak directly to you, I think you hear my words and you think to yourself, I have to undomesticate myself immediately, right? Because even you, Chris, the question that you ask me is from that worldview, right?
Mm.
Like, what do we do? Well, that's, again, wrong question. The question is, what does it mean for me to leap? Maybe, just maybe, you have the opportunity to go on a walk in the English countryside, whatever that means to you, and look at some bluebells for the first time in your life. Maybe for the first time in your life, you can consider buying better food, maybe grown locally, right? That's the leap. Do that. Be that. You might say, Daniel, I don't own a 400-acre concentric rewilding project full of domesticated herbivores of beef, cattle, draft horses, sheep, and goat for wool and hair and meat and milk. I don't own that. So this book doesn't apply to me. No, no, no. Half of the content in this book, as you well know, Chris, because you've read it and listened to it, it's not about agriculture. It's about being. It's about small leaps where we start to challenge slowly and relative to our own operations and our own understanding of what we can leap off of and what we can't immediately, right? So we can progressively understand what it means to be human. I
Mm.
love the idea of reawakening because when you wake up, and everybody knows this, I took a nap earlier this afternoon. I've been writing and we have a mare that's foaling, and we were out there at 2 a.m. trying to see if she was, anyways, doesn't matter. The point is I was tired. I took a nap. And, it took me about 20 minutes to wake up. Initially, you have the moment of consciousness, but then your moment of consciousness, you start to check and you're like, where am I? You're conscious, but you're still living in your subconscious and you start to form that feeling, right? Then you feel your body. Even if you shoot out of bed, that's still the case. Reawakening is not leaping in the modern understanding of jumping off a cliff. I don't want you to jump off the cliff. In the book, I talk about a ladder. I say in the process of civilization, we've climbed the ladder of progress. And to some of us, we think we have to jump off, right? We just have to jump off the ladder, break our ankles and our knees, fracturing our tibias and our collarbone on the way down. And it's just like, that's the only opportunity we have. That's the only option. It's the only answer to the question that he's asking. And I'm asking you to ask a better question. What can I do while on the ladder to slowly lower myself back down to ground level? That's the question. And so for us, it's very easy. We have the land, we have the animals. Let's concentrically rewild together from an ecological perspective. Maybe for you, you have a porch. Maybe you start to grow some herbs and start to talk to them. Maybe for the first time, go for a walk, find the closest herbaceous perennial. That is to say, a photosynthesizing piece of green matter. It could be a dandelion in the concrete. It can be a tree. I don't care what it is. And for the first time, you stopped and you said, hello. It sounds woo-woo, it sounds new age, but it forces you to have humility for the first time, to recognize that the operations of the earth all around us is not a scientific, linear, mathematical function where you do this and you get Y in return.
Mm.
Maybe for the first time, the world around you becomes autonomous. Maybe you start reading poetry. I can keep going on all these examples. But
Yeah.
the first question is, what does it mean to leap? And then the second question to me, and this is how we wrote the book, the second question has to be, what do we have that we feel we cannot let go of? Okay. And for me, who daily, 80, 90 hours a week, working on the land, bleeding with the land, crying into the land and with the land, and grieving and rejoicing and celebrating when it rains, and mourning and praying and dancing when it doesn't. That's very easy for me. And that's the idea of outcomes, ecological outcomes. Because we have three children, my wife and I, a 6-year-old Elowen, a 5-year-old named Weymouth, and then a 3-year-old named Sequoia. And I look at them every day because they struggle with health issues like everyone else. And I think to myself, health issues are only increasing. Land desertification and ecological function is only increasing and decreasing. And I look at them and I think in the future, you're going to fight wars over water. What can I do now to prevent that? Right? But that's the wrong question. That's the question we're so pent up in. We
Mm.
so see as the question of the day, what can we do now to save the world? That is a joke. It's an app. You think that because you're going to shit in the bucket instead of the industrial, toilet system and start composting your own manure, your human manure, right? This like you are so revolutionary and you're doing nothing. Do that. I'm not saying don't do that, but it's from the wrong perspective, the wrong worldview. Instead, at the end of the book, and maybe um, I have it pulled up here because I was looking at it earlier, and I'll just read you a very short paragraph, very short. It won't be
Please
long.
do.
But this is what I'm getting at. And this is what the indigenous in my life, the true ancient wisdom holders that living in the modern world around us, still as the world, not in the world, but as the world. They have shared this with me, and I give it to you freely. It is not my truth. We are the latecomers, but I share it with you. And I think the difference is not trying, I'm not saying don't try to be the change. I'm not saying give up hope. What I'm saying is start dreaming. Okay. And I'll read this to you. I say, this is like maybe it'll take me 45 seconds, but bear with me. I write, I write under the shadow of mountains, but soon these ancient crags will be fully naked,
Mm.
clear cut past their epidermis, and their eroding hills will become rocky knolls, and our grandchildren, bouncing on our callous knees, will ask about the great Appalachians, or we call them Appalachians. What were they like, Grandpa? They will ask as they ride on giggles, or maybe they will ask as they kneel before our graves. They were profitable, we will respond, either in tears or under them. Our grandchildren walk our dreams. They will either smile at us or curse our graves. I pray they smile. I live for them to smile. I dream their smiles. We do not have to move mountains. When I wrote that, and I'm kind of tearing up now, when I wrote that, I was just literally crying, pouring tears, because the worldview, the idea of human occupation in this world today that is so industrialized, it's so complicated, it's so mechanized, it's putting us as the saviors of the world, it's very stressful, right? And so if I'm asking you to do anything, humility, going for the walks. I've given you so many examples. I'm asking you to give up your understanding of an outcome of the future as if one human being can change it. Because as we keep trying to control our way forward, right, this is all civilization is. It's a controlled progression moving forward. We are only creating more colonization, more desertification, more degeneration, more empty, eroding hillsides that used to be clothed in beautiful forests in our wake. We cannot solve a problem with more control that was built out of control to begin with. We need to become human. And what I mean by that is give up the idea of outcomes and become a grandfather. Like become somebody that your descendants will look back on and say, hell yeah, right? Like I rode on that guy's knee. When they visit your grave, whatever that means to you, they rejoice that, Chris was their ancestor, right? Not that he fought against Earth's climate, not that he struggled his way to plant as much biodiversity as possible, but that in his life, he was able to humble himself enough to be akin, a relation, a cousin with that on Earth. And that's not saying don't do anything,
Yeah.
but at least start with dreaming. And so, what does it mean to leap? And what do you have to let go that you just feel like you can't let go? And start there, because if you feel like you can't let anything go, I love this. Dr. Fred Provenza wrote the foreword to Stagtine. Dr. Fred Provenza, for those who might not know him, I mean, he is the scientist behind the regenerative agricultural movement. He's long retired, was at the University of or Utah State University, I believe, or Utah University. over in the west of the United States here, Turtle Island. And I loved it. He concludes his foreword, which is very scientific. It's very creative and imaginative science, but it's very scientific. He concludes it by saying that it's the questions that we ask that start to really enliven us to the understanding that we are mere spirits living garbed in clay on this ever evolving orb of impermanence, or something like this. Just straight poetry, straight philosophy. But the point is, we have to understand this, that the earth moves slowly and she steadily becomes earth, not the earth. And that slowness is its patience and its beauty. And you can't just let go. Does that make sense? You physically can't do this. It's impossible. Because when you jump off, you lose your footing. And I'm not saying to lose your footing, to fall free falling through the air. Like, I don't want that. Nothing wants that. Life doesn't do that. Maybe a bird does it for a moment and then it immediately catches itself. So
Yeah.
the only, aviation that we have in earthen repertoire still doesn't free fall for fun, right? And so,
Yeah. I feel what comes up for me is stopping, just stopping even for a moment. I think that's the takeaway for me in everything you've just said. It's the invitation to just stop
mm,
and pay attention,
yeah,
be
yeah.
attentive.
Pay attention is a moral act. I love that phrase. Um, because I mean I like it for so many reasons, but it's still focused on the idea of action.
Yeah, I also
I'm not
like,
saying don't do anything,
I know, I
right?
also love, which feeds in here, is was one of my favorite parts of the book where you talk about tradition is not the worshipping of the ashes, but the preservation of the fire. And
Yeah,
I feel that is like, that's a big hole in spirituality or new age, that we are so intent on worshipping and like
yeah,
putting things, people, whatever on pedestals. And no, it's like preserve like the fire, like by doing your part, like really. So it
yeah,
is, it's but it's holding these two nuanced ideas and like invitations in the same breath, in the same hands,
right,
to grapple with the stopping but also participating, and that conversation that is like a to and froing of that, and not just one,
right.
because we are
Yeah. Well,
conditioned.
so
I'm conditioned in I'm conditioned into thinking like, action's what we need. It's such a condition of our time to be right. It's got to happen now. It's got to happen for me. And I spoke to this in a podcast recently, but I recognize the shift was it's not going to happen in my lifetime, and I'm not going to get the credit.
mm,
I'm not going to get the credit for this,
it's
and that
fun,
that needs to be that needs to be it. We need to have
right?
that. We need to reclaim that.
Yeah, yeah. Our children walk our dreams, and hopefully our grandchildren can run in them. And so have dreams, right? Have these
Yeah.
passions. Don't give it up. I'm not saying don't have a vision for the future. Just don't let that vision colonize your present and the cousins around you and their presence. But also don't forsake the self. Because I'm not sitting here and I'm, really thanking you for making this a long form conversation, because it gives us opportunities to stick it to take a step back, really even into the conversation, to realize that it begins by a self reawakening. And then we can start to reawaken as a cousin. So from inside of us to the soil, from the soul to the soil as it goes. But that's not to forget about the self, right? Because when you're asking, like, what does it mean to leap? I'm not saying become selfless. I'm not saying to give up this idea of life that you hold so firmly, or that your children should or shouldn't have good lives. Like, I'm not saying give up this understanding, but you work inside to outside and back in again. So for instance, there's an entire section of the book dedicated to this, and it's particulars you can read about. I won't give you all the particulars here, but a lot of us really care about nutrient-rich foods. I don't know your listeners like you do, but I would imagine the overwhelming majority of them, if they were to get a survey, they would agree that nutrient-rich or nutrient-dense or foods high in bioavailable secondary compounds, phytochemicals, whatever it is probably pretty high on their list. They
Mhm.
like that. And even if we allow ourselves to think internally, meaning that we went from our soul to the soil and back to our soul again, we start to realize that unless we do that well, we are not feeding ourselves well. So there's an entire chapter dedicated to many things, but it's really the chemical transference
Mm.
of chemicals we don't often think about from our food to our bodies. So we're so enthused, we get so energized. Podcasts and books have been done about this, and they've just beaten it into the ground that what your food eats matters, right? What your food eats matters. So this is the difference between, conventional beef and grass-fed and finished beef, to be very clear, and many other things. So the food, that is to say, the life that goes into the making of your food matters. And what I'm saying here is that maybe, just maybe, and the creative sciences follow and really do lead to a very definitive absolutely, there's no maybes about it, other chemicals are inheritable too. That is to say, feelings, emotions, depression, and things like this. And so there's a whole chapter dedicated to basically the blood installation of cortisol and adrenal processing between slaughtered animals and their human consumers. And what is found is so interesting. If the slaughter stress, or if the life stress of an animal exceeds a certain limit, which is pretty low limit, by the way. I mean, it can happen in a split second of an eye, but basically, it's this: if an animal experiences any minuscule amount of stress, that stress, that cortisol, that adrenal processing through corticosteroid receptors and everything else, is able to instill that stress as cortisol, a chemical, inside the blood plasma. And it also can do that in the mammary glands, which we won't deal with right now. And so there's a lot of studies that detail basically the stress in adrenal functioning in slaughtered animals. Um, and it translates over to a blood installation of cortisol in processed meat. But it comes down to pH, and there's a lot of other details. There's 50 other pages of details that I'm skipping over to make this a little bit more accessible on a podcast. But as that pH rises, so stress in meat increases pH. As that pH rises, it decreases the nutrient, both primary and secondary compounds' ability to become nutrients for the consumer. It decreases that nutrient's ability to pass through what's called the lipid phase in the beta carotene and other things in its transference to humans, and it disallows that nutrient from being basically bioavailable to the consumer. So really, really high level, taking all of the scientific mumbo jumbo aside, high stress in beef means decreasing bioavailability of nutrients when you're consuming that beef. And so the outcome of this, the impact of this is, let's pretend that you listen to everything that I'm saying and you say, Daniel, yes, but I still matter. I still want nutrient dense beef. I'm not letting go of all of this, right? Let's say you're putting up those hurdles. That's fine. Have those hurdles. I have those hurdles. You and I are viewing this thing from the same perspective. But if you don't start to let go, the stress in animals is not only inheritable to humans, that's what a lot of the other conversations in science that I'm skipping over, but it decreases the availability of the nutrients to your body when you consume it. So that cow could be like grass-born, grass-fed, grass-finished, grazing the most biodiverse, regenerated pasture on planet Earth. Let's pretend that that is your local farmer, and let's pretend you buy that fresh. If that cow experiences stress, your body's ability to basically allow the nutrient-dense soil to produce nutrient-dense beef, to produce bioavailable and nutrient-rich foods for your own body decreases to a point that it could have just been raised on a singular species of forage. I mean, it
Mm.
decreases that much. We focus on practices, we focus on biodiversity, and we forget that happiness matters. Happiness, right?
So,
An animal's ability to have a relationship with its herd, to process its own adrenal system, the inherited trauma that humans know, right, is still present in mammals. Again, more of the science that I'm skipping over. And if all of these things are true, then what I'm saying about the concentric rewilding, the letting go, the being, the attention as being a moral act, all of this comes back to the health of the steak on your plate. So if you have to think about it from that perspective, allow it to happen. Because you, as a human being, need to be making better decisions about your own health. I'm not saying to let that go, to start going to McDonald's and other places and who cares what you eat. No, no, no. I'm saying start to care, but start to care about the life on your plate,
mhm.
not the food. Don't reduce it to food. And when you do that, you realize the beauty that is around us is a whole beauty. It cannot be reduced.
Isn't it got more chance if it's organic, if you're paying more for it to have all those elements of this animal, hasn't it got more chance of being happy? Or are you saying, and the invitation is to find out more information about that animal? That's where we should be spending our money, finding out
Both.
and building relationship.
That's a really good question. Both. I would say both, and it comes down to the extremeness of the leap that you want to take. And so the book, what we're looking at is the science, the very creative sciences um, indicate that there's one study that we look at where pigs were raised in the forest and pigs were raised indoors. The pigs raised in the forest, I think, followed an organic diet. The pigs raised indoors did not. So you have these two, interposed systems: regenerative agriculture, happy pigs in the woods; conventional agriculture, pigs in pens on slatted concrete floors. They measured the blood cortisol volume of both of these systems, which obviously are going to be very different in their lives. In the slaughtering process, they found them to be uniform, that the blood cortisol installation of stress into the meat that decreases the lipid phase, decreases a lot of the phytochemicals and availability of nutrients from being, actually uptaken by the consumer. All of that is leveling within the processing if stress is involved. And so the key is to do two things. Number one, like, go meet your food. Try your best. And I realize you can't do that with everything. I consumed something today that didn't grow in my region, so I will never be able to meet that food, not as it lives in its current way. This is not a statement of totality, but the best you possibly can, meet your food, see if it's happy, see if you would be happy. Meet these cows, meet the goats, meet the sheep, meet the pigs, whatever it is. Try your best, get there if possible. And again, it might not be possible. But number two, try to value it. You might not be able to control the slaughtering technique of the meat on your plate. You
Mm,
might not know how to differentiate the slaughtering techniques available to you to produce the meat on your plate. But while that meat is on your plate, and it could be a dandelion, it could be a tincture in your mouth coming from a glass bottle, and everything in between, any life that you take in, recognize it, attend to it, right? Thank it. Something that I'm writing about in Cliffhawk, the second book after Stagtine in the trilogy, is the work of Veda Austin, a wonderful New Zealand scientist and thinker
yeah.
who is proving scientifically that the way you approach water,
Water,
the
yeah.
soul and the spirit that you literally exhibit and allow to manifest in the world around you as you're approaching water changes its crystalline nature, and it communicates back to you. So she's actually taken, as I understand it, and I encourage you, go look at Veda Austin, look at her Instagram, YouTube, whatever it's going to be, any podcast she's on. It's marvelous. Go to her directly. But to kind of wet your lips on the thing, she has taken tap water and approached it with respect and reverence, and it's
Mm,
changed into something very, very healthy. She has taken spring water and approached it with a lack of reverence, and it's been very similar to the staleness, the lacklusterness of tap water. So it's the way we approach our environment that changes the way that that environment is able to process its own ways. And the same is true back on us, right? This is this correlation of spirit and matter that is at constant play all around us. So whether or not you care about what I'm saying or not, it doesn't matter. If you want nutrient-dense food on your plate, you have to come at it with respect and a relationship if possible. And if you can hunt it yourself, now we're really deep, deep diving into true health. That's not all possible for everyone. So having a relationship with your food and having reverence for your food is something that we can all participate with and attend to.
hmm Yeah, funny to mention how I actually invited her on the podcast when we were chatting. So, yes, I was
Oh,
aware.
really? Wonderful. Well, then stay tuned. She's marvelous.
Yeah, yeah, we couldn't
Marvelous.
figure a time, but yeah. Have you heard of Mary Ruddock?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, she's coming on soon as well.
That's amazing.
Okay, yes. So the next thing I want to touch upon is grief, which I think is part and
Yes.
parcel of this conversation as we kind of come towards a close. I'm thinking that there's a statement at the end is like the world is ending and that is
Mm.
okay. And it kind of felt like the end of the beginning. Well, it was like that kind of essence of it. This is the end of the beginning. And yeah, like that one of the best chapters. By the way, just to close on the biological inheritance, that chapter, like from scientific standpoint, is outstanding. It's like one of the best chapters that I got so much from. And I'm sure I'm going to create a little clip and it'll go viral from the
Wonderful.
things you just said. And it's what did hit and land for a lot of people was this acknowledgement. Uh, yes, there was a lot of kickback and likely contributed to the viral nature of this video that we put together, but the xenohormesis. And it obviously is going to land for a lot more people, but not going to be so vocal about why. And there was way more people that were like, yeah, I understand this. I think people latched onto your stress in the wind type terminology phrasing, and people just went in on that of like, what is he talking about?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, well, I think we understand it and we get it, and yeah, it's coming to our attention for right reason. But yeah, that chapter is just phenomenal. So the towards the end of this part of the chronicle, you do invite us to say goodbye to a world that we were born into. And I'd like to ask you, like, how's your grief process going? What stage are you at? It feels like radical acceptance. But the end is of the book is talking about this kind of hope, the eradication of outcomes. I actually sent that to a friend today. He was coming
Mm.
back from a vision quest, and hope was in his heart, and I sent him that it was alive, and it, I don't want to agree with it, but there's a part of me that like that feels right. It feels right. I don't want to agree that hope is the eradication of outcomes because it does feel like out of my control, but I guess it's the judgment of outcomes for me. It's like judgment plays a big part in all of this, like pretending that we know the right way. But yeah, if you could talk about
Yeah.
how much grief plays into this, and I don't know if you've come across Stephen Jenkinson's work. I'm sure you have. Um, Dugat Hind mentioned him actually in your podcast, but you two
Yeah.
would have the most incredible conversation. I've just done a whole month on this in my men's group, and we talked about death, and we talked about Grief Walker, which is his film on YouTube, which everyone should go watch. But it's of the same ilk. It's like culture, moving away from mother culture, moving away from this death phobic culture, and it has to be a part of the same conversation, which you so rightly put in. Because if we don't know how to grieve properly, then what, where are we at? So yeah, if you could touch upon that for me, that'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned so many names. Just to pick on Dugald Hine because he's brilliant. He writes a lot. His book is titled At Work in the Ruins. And in a very similar way, I'm writing about it. I say we're going to be rising from the ashes, I guess.
Mm,
A little bit maybe more hopeful of language because at this point in the book, I mean, you're on like almost page 400, and I'm trying to give you some hope. Um, but it's so crucial. The first thing to do is to recognize your perception of the future. That's what Dugald, that's what a lot of people are writing about. To be at work in the ruins is to first and foremost understand that you're in the ruins, right? If you're standing in ruins and you think you're not, we have a, larger problem to deal with first. And I think that's where a lot of us are. And that's where I was for a long time until my conversation with my friend, the Lakota Sundancer, Wahanka Petopa, Four Arrows is his name. And he gave me that. He gave me that. The startled awakening to the understanding that we are in the ruins. In the book, I write that many systems, but regenerative agriculture being one of these systems, it takes industrial capitalism for granted and earth as a resource, as a guarantee. Okay. And so what a lot of our systems do is they just take this competitive capitalistic mindset, which works in some cases. I'm not saying it's all bad, but for granted, meaning that competition is the absolute working force behind all of Earth. Human systems, natural systems. What I mean by that is human created systems, hard systems, technological based, machine based systems, and complex systems, loving systems, reciprocal, reciprocity based systems, etc. And it just pins competition in that. The second part being that Earth as a resource is as a guarantee. So much of this has imbued my work over the last, 15 years. And to some degree, when I answer, when I asked the question earlier, what do you have that you feel like you can't let go? To me, that's this, right? Because I am a quote unquote steward of this land. If it increases in biodiversity, it's because I did something. And if it doesn't increase in biodiversity, I feel like it's also because I done something. I got in the way. I did something wrong. And so it's a heavy burden to bear. And the grief I think that we need to experience is the grief in realizing that we're not saviors of the world. as I said earlier, we cannot control our way out of a problem that it was constructed initially out of control,
Mm.
right? And that's why in the beginning of the book, there's a letter that I wrote to the reader, which is in the published version. I don't know if you have that copy or not, but there's a letter. It's literally titled "Letter from the Author," and it's a 3 or 4 page, really emotional, intense, intimate foray into my mind at the conclusion of writing the book. And I mean, there's a lot of things I could say in there, but I think the thing that I want to focus on is the grief that inhabits the process of really coming to understanding that we are not saviors of the world is instant, and it's a lot. When we turn that back into action, that grief, too soon, I think that's when we can really, really degenerate very quickly. And I think that's a lot of the heart of a lot of regenerative agricultural practitioners or farmers today. They perceive the grief in the world. Maybe it's a health journey. And so they start running fast. We need to start mob grazing more. We need to get more animals. We need to increase biodiversity. We need to plant some more trees. We got to dig some ponds. We got to increase swales so that we can slow soak and sink the water, moving, perpendicular to contour instead of being horizontal to contour. And like we're doing all of these things. What I'm asking is, in view of many indigenous teachings that the earth is in a constant state of birth and death and rebirth again. Like the Lakota, when I was talking to Wahankape Topa, he said, Daniel, we're at the end of the fourth world. We know this. You're surprised by this, and you're grieving, because of your surprise. We've been looking forward to the birth of the fifth world for the last 500 years when it was prophesied. Welcome to the party, you latecomer fool. He didn't say that part, but that's the way I felt. And I think that's a very healthy way to feel. Yeah, we are grieving a process that has long been prophesied and has long been considered as a process of hope, you see? And so when I'm writing this, and again, I'm looking at the very end of the book, um, I say I write not with a concern for saving the world, for I no longer believe that balance is attainable before some collapse. I say the end of the world is coming and that is okay. I write with optimism and hope, right? Because it's not that we don't look for an outcome, but rather outcomes will come and we celebrate that. That's the birth of the fifth world, according to our indigenous, friends and who are much wiser than we are. That outcome is the hope. The fifth world is the hope. And that all we have to do is be us. And what I mean by be us, be human, it's not like do whatever makes you feel good. It's not, anything like that. Rather, it's Creator has created you on this earth for this purpose in this time to do something. Do that. But don't be a savior of the world because you're not. For instance, my neighbors, they just deforested 2,500 acres of old growth hardwood forest. For the last 15 years or so, we've been working, really for the last decade, intensely. We have been working on 400 acres. The amount of soil health lost in this period of 3 weeks when a old growth, 2,500 acres of old growth forest got deforested mechanically, it took them 3 weeks, is twice, 3, 4 times the amount that in a decade we have been able to build here on our 400 acres. And even if we were to be comparing apples to apples, 2,500 acres or 2,500 acres, degeneration, hate, that is to say, hate is always going to be more potent in producing an outcome than love. It's why, and stick with me because it seems
Mm.
ironic or controversial, but think about the video that you and I did of the last podcast that went viral. Even in your conversation here with me today, you made the comment that it was the hate that spoke the loudest. And so it just seemed like a lot of people were angry, but it's the people that really were energized by it that we didn't get to see their energy, right? And so what I'm saying is, love will always obviously speak the loudest. If that's not obvious to you, maybe that's the work and self-work you need to do. But the outcomes, as long as we live in the physical world, the outcomes, right, of 2,500 acres of deforestation mechanically, instantly in 3 weeks is always going to be more intense than anything that I can do, controlled or not controlled, here on my 400 acres. And so for us to think that we can save the world is to some degree the same thing, for us to consider that we can do something that is totally beyond our capacities. And it's not beyond our capacities because we're not strong enough. So this is not an urge for you to get stronger, right? It's the opposite. It's beyond our capacities because it's not our created purpose. Our creative purpose is to be a Homo sapien, one out of 6,500 mammals all around us, and to live and co-create and be with our relations in place, doing whatever it is that we are called to do, which might for you mean, right, this podcast. And I'm not trying to be coy or ironic or even, self-congratulatory to you. For me, it means a concentric rewilding project in the middle of nowhere, Central Virginia. And that's the beautiful thing, right? It comes back to like, what does it mean to leap? I hope it
Mm.
means something very different for you that it means for me. Attention, okay, is not just a moral act. It's not just relative, but it has to adhere to a greater created purpose, right? You might be listening to this and you don't think that there's any sort of creator above us all. All of this is built from the worldview, from the indigenous and an earthen ethic that there is. Okay. And so I can't separate myself from that. And so with that vision, our role is to do what we were put here to do, which might mean to increase biodiversity. I realize this. This is not lost on me, right? But if I'm focused on the outcome, I can't but be focused on the pathway to get to that outcome. I'm focused on that. There's going to be a pathway to get to an outcome, of course. Right? Every breath we breathe is a pathway to the outcome of staying alive. But I'm not focused on breathing. Realize that in this moment. You've listened to this podcast. We're an hour, 1 hour and 40 minutes, whatever it's been. And how many of you have focused on breathing primarily for the last hour and 45 minutes? I haven't, right? And yet we're still here. This is what I mean. Be a human with the idea of being alive, like you're breathing with the idea of staying alive. But don't focus on the breathing. Don't focus there saying, okay, now I got to inhale. Okay, now I was told to hold it because that's really good. Holding the carbon dioxide in my lungs really, increases the white blood cell and count and
Mm.
everything else. And then I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it go very slowly, maybe 5 or 6 seconds, really, really healthy. Like nobody is thinking about this.
I think
When
that's
we are
it.
forced to Yeah, when we're forced to turn inward into meditation,
Mm.
right? I've led meditations. I'm sure you've led meditations. We've been a part of meditations. The first thing that we do outside of quieting down is focus on your breathing. Feel it. Because what that's going to do is it's going to focus on you being here, right? But if you focused on being here all the time, you wouldn't be here, right? You would have missed everything around you.
Yeah, I that is the analogy that is really fitting for this conversation because it posits that to return to what it means to be human really is that like returning, being the breath, but not so focused on it. Like your role, your job here to do should be really, I don't use the word should very often, but it's to be the breath in between life and death. But in that essence of your role, the role that we're all playing out. We have a duty, we have something to contribute, to participate in, to procreate, to like contribute. It feels like that's the breath, but we've lost that in our mental fixed masturbation of being here and what does it mean? And it feels like that analogy, if I could articulate it in a more concise way, is the one I'm gonna focus on and tune into because it's that breath that is relearning for me of like what it means to be here.
And it's ironic and it's very hard, which might contribute to the grief because what I'm really saying is that we're meditating too much,
Mm,
right? Wanting to be the savior of the world is not a bad thing. Wanting to meditate too much is not a bad thing, you see? But it's when we step out of the natural order of things, that is to say, when we try to, as a single person, try to save the world, or, you know, as a single person, walk our lives in one meditation, that's when we start to miss the beauty of everything around us, like the snake or the butterfly that's now out of my window. Be there, start there, meditate there, right? Really focus on what does it mean to leap? What do I really vision for the future? And then to some degree, let it go. Go start living life. Get out of the meditative stupor, right? You found health there, but now it's time, go out. Do something.
Mm,
Okay. When I say do something, I say it with a very, lowercase do, whatever that is, but do it. Don't control it. Do it. Be it. In the beginning, it's gonna be more doing, in the end, it's gonna be more like being. And that's the progressive state that we have to get to. Because I'm
mm,
not asking you to leap, just to start to walk. And as you start to walk, I hope you start to descend. And as you start to descend, I hope you find your knees. When you get onto your knees, I hope you start to pray and to dream, right? For your grandchildren to run in. Our children walk, our grandchildren will run. Like that's the leap that I'm asking,
mm.
and we're looking at it from agriculture perspective, of course. But this applies to everyone. It really does. Yes, you might not, really enjoy the xenohormesis part in section one, talking about chemical transference and non-nutritive, compounds and things. Um, but I wrote the book to really understand what it means to be human as a latecomer, you know, as me, someone who has spent my entire adult life trying to control regeneration to come back. What does it mean for us to look at ourselves again? And I hope it does the task justice. Like anytime you do anything creative, you look back and you're like, well, that was my mentality at the time. I hope it was sufficient. And
Yeah,
so that's the prayer, that it's sufficient, that it
for
does what it
sure.
needs to do.
Yeah, that's what I love about an intention. You have to let it go.
Mm,
You hold it for a moment and you let it go. That's the whole process of holding something in tension.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Beautiful, man. I again, we could go on, and there will be more conversations, I hope. You're providing me firstly and foremost just so much, so many questions that I'm sitting with and navigating, and yeah, man, I just really enjoy everything that you stand for, and I see it. I see you. I see what's needed. Um, I don't know, man. I could say so much. It fills me up in hope, but in also surrender of what I need to be. And it allows me to relinquish con some sort of control or some sort of expectation or pressure that I also feel that a younger generation feel. Um, that's what this also provides. That I'm sure you'll get that feedback. It's like younger generations are feeling a lot of pressure and anxiety about the future. But it also invites us to look at our relationship with time. And as you speak to around nature, it's like everything's completed, but nothing is in rush. Nothing rushes. Nothing rushes, but everything is completed. And I've always loved that. Like going to nature, you'll find things make a lot more sense. And it is that, it's just letting go of our concept and judgment of time. What is long time? What is a slow time?
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
but
And it's not always good. It's a weird way to, conclude here.
mm,
But it feels right. I thought about it for a moment, chewed on it a little bit, and made the decision to say it. Um, but the pace of nature and her secret is patience, right? That nature is going to do it. It's fine. Earth is us is earth. And in that way, everything's going to be done in its time. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is going to be done to our expectations.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
And that's fine.
Zach
We
Bush
just,
talks about the how we judge moments in time, and when the dinosaurs existed, like, did we judge that as a tragedy? Like, no one was around to judge that. It was a moment, it happened. But we have such an attachment to our own existence and our own what we determine very finite existence, which again comes back into what relationship do we have with what who we are and what we're a part of,
yeah,
and that severance and that abandonment wound that is the gaping hole in this conversation, in all of our lives, of our abandonment of our creator. Um, and that's, yeah, that's the mission. It's the torch. My friend Tony talks about the baton and running your best leg, and it's carrying that torch and just, making sure it stays alight for your time.
yeah, yeah. Because how boring would it be if you got this finish line, your torch was all blown out? You know? I mean that.
Yeah.
And it's the question. It's the same questions I've been asking to you. What does it mean to leap, etc. But like if you're running with a torch, realize if you didn't have that torch, would you still be running?
Mm.
And if the answer to the question is no, take better care of the torch.
Yeah.
That's really what the book's about.
That's so true. The pace. Yeah. Anything you want to leave us with? Invitations and or where to? I think it's tomorrow, isn't it? The start of your course.
Yeah, the course starts tomorrow. We'll have plenty of them. It seems like it was filled up pretty quick. A lot of
Okay.
people were quite interested. And so, we'll probably be running a bunch of them. It's not typical to study a book and all of its founding materials directly with the author in a live environment. And so that's exciting, providing that with people
Yeah.
and sharing that space. And
Hmm.
I've already learned so much. And so yeah, that's that. Yeah, I mean, thank you. This whole process is just a massive, and wonderful, blessed thank you. I I've written books, done that, and I'm constantly surprised, marveled, in complete wonderment. When people pick them up and they like it, because it's your soul on paper. That's all it is. It's 9 months of me being, locked in a little writing shed for a couple hours a day, just putting my soul on paper and spending a lot of time with other people's souls as well. Written word, conversations like we've been talking about. And it's wonderful that it's really being received well. And when I say received well, it's not all positive. I want to differentiate that. I've learned a lot. I've seen, different worldviews of certain people. A lot of people have liked it, don't get me wrong. Um, but it's the community that we need. I get so tired of unity, where we all just, line up in a massive circle jerk, and it's just this massive fan cheering section, and it makes you feel good for the moment, you know, but unity cannot actually co-create together a more beautiful world. I just don't think it could. Community can. It's conversations like you provided here, some honest feedback, some questions, right? That really made me think. And so whatever this book does to you, if you read it, I hope it asks you um, the questions you already had, and then empowers you to make a decision in your own way, in your own life, in your own created purpose. So that's my biggest hope and also my smallest hope. It's my complete hope. So you can find the book basically really anywhere you find books. Um, we're opening it up to some international distribution on Amazon and other places. Right now, if you wanted to support the project and get a book signed and get it sent from, our own hands here, you can go to our website, wildtimshel.com. It's cheaper. The shipping is free. You get it directly from us. You support us. We make exponentially more money if you were to do that. And so if you're interested in buying the book, go to wildtimshel.com. I'm sure,
Hmm.
Chris, you could put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
And if that's not accessible to you, bookshop.com, Amazon, your local bookshop, whatever makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah. Stagtine.com as well.
Yeah, stagtine.com will get you there.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. Yeah. Just honoring you, honoring your dedication to this work at this time. You're a family guy, you got many kids, and you have 400-acre, you know, wildland, which requires a lot of, well, I don't know. You're there a lot, and
Yeah,
I'm sure it is
requires a lot
demanding.
of being.
There's a lot of being, a lot of listening. And it just, yeah, just what you spoke to, it really awoken something in me of how much time and dedication it does to create this thing. It's like a birth. It is like a 9-month birthing process, and then it's born,
Yeah,
and then it's not you anymore, and it lives a life of its own, and
yeah,
it impacts people along the way, and people will project their own ideas of what they think you are or who you are, and that comes at a cost. So yeah, I just know that, and just celebrating you for putting it out there and continuing this work, which is your life's work. So it comes through, and yeah, for my best leg, I'm going to be speaking your name where I go. So more people can do that, then we'll see where it goes.
blessings, my friend. We need all the community we can get, and you're wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I mean, a great podcaster, fine, but a dear friend, and I thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you for
Yeah,
being there.
I appreciate that. Yeah, better in person podcast actually. So maybe we'll make it happen.
Listen, I've said it once, I'll say it again. I would love to come to the UK and Ireland and places. I would love to do a quick little tour there. So make it happen. I'll come. I'll come with a
Yeah,
box of books. I'll start throwing them out of the plane. Let's get it done.
amazing, brother. Thank you, man. Anything else you'd like to leave us with? We wrap up.
No, blessings to you all. It's an honor.